Everyone. I am pleased to introduce again Cynthia, who is going to walk us through the book discussion, Resilient Grieving. This is a community book talk and a healing conversation. Thank you for being here, Cynthia. And I also want to thank Kimia, who is also here, who will help alongside in the conversation.
Thank you, and thank Kimia. It's a real joy to be here. It's so lovely to be back with the Harvard Club of Southern California. So today we're here for Resilient Grieving, Community Book Talk and Healing Conversation. And I really want to talk with you about strategies for getting through hard times without losing yourself. So I'm a lecturer for the Division of Continuing Education at Harvard University. And in addition, I earned my PhD in psychology at Harvard University. So like you, I'm an alumna or an alumnus, but I'm an alum. And here we go. So today we're going to be talking about Resilient Grieving by Lucy Hone. This is a picture of Dr. Hone from her website, which is also linked here. A picture of her with her dog. So you can see that even after really difficult circumstances, there's authentic joy, and there can be real purpose, joy, and meaning in life. And I think that can be hard for people, a lot of people after major losses. So for anyone who hasn't had a chance to take a peek at the book yet, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play her TED Talk, which I also have linked here for you, so that if you want to share it with friends later, we will be making my slides available. And here we go. And let me know if you have trouble hearing.
So I'd like to start, if I may, by asking you some questions. If you've ever lost someone you truly love, ever had your heart broken, ever struggled through an acrimonious divorce, or been the victim of infidelity, please stand up. If standing up isn't accessible to you, you can put your hand up. Please stay standing and keep your hand up there. If you've ever lived through a natural disaster, been bullied or been made redundant, stand on up. If you've ever had a miscarriage, if you've ever had an abortion or struggled through infertility, please stand up. Finally, if you or anyone you love has had to cope with mental illness, dementia, some form of physical impairment, or cope with suicide, please stand up. Look around you. Adversity doesn't discriminate. If you are alive, you are going to have to, or you've already had to, deal with some tough times. Thank you, everyone. Take a seat. I started studying resilience research a decade ago at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. It was an amazing time to be there because the professors who trained me had just picked up the contract to train all 1.1 million American soldiers to be as mentally fit as they always have been physically fit. As you can imagine, you don't get a much more skeptical, discerning audience than the American drill sergeants returning from Afghanistan. So for someone like me, whose main quest in life is trying to work out how we take the best of scientific findings out of academia and bring them to people in their everyday lives, it was a pretty inspiring place to be. I finished my studies in America, and I returned home here to Christchurch to start my doctoral research. I'd just begun that study when the Christchurch earthquakes hit. So I put my research on hold, and I started working with my home community to help them through that terrible post-quake period. I work with all sorts of organisations, from government departments to building companies and all sorts of community groups, teaching them the ways of thinking and acting that we know boost resilience. I thought that was my calling, my moment to put all of that research to good use. But sadly, I was wrong. For my own true test came in 2014 on Queen's birthday weekend. we and 2 other families had decided to go down to Lake Ohau and bike the Alps to Ocean. At the last minute, my beautiful 12-year-old daughter, Abby, decided to hop in the car with her best friend, Ella, also 12, and Ella's mum, Sally, a dear, dear friend of mine. On the way down, as they travelled through Rakaya on Thompson's track, a car sped through a stop sign, crashing into them and killing all 3 of them instantly. In the blink of an eye, I find myself flung to the other side of the equation, waking up with a whole new identity. Instead of being the resilience expert, suddenly I'm the grieving mother, waking up not knowing who I am, trying to wrap my head around unthinkable news, my world smashed to smithereens. Suddenly I'm the one on the end of all this expert advice. And I can tell you, I didn't like what I heard one little bit. In the days after Abby died, we were told we were now prime candidates for family estrangement, that we were likely to get divorced and we were at high risk of mental illness. Wow, I remember thinking, thanks for that. I thought my life was already pretty shit. Leaflets describe the 5 stages of grief: anger, bargaining, denial, depression, acceptance. Victim support arrived at our door and told us that we could expect to write off the next 5 years to grief. I know the leaflets and the resources meant well, but in all of that advice, they left us feeling like victims, totally overwhelmed by the journey ahead and powerless to exert any influence over our grieving whatsoever. I didn't need to be told how bad things were. Believe me, I already knew things were truly terrible. What I needed most was hope. I needed a journey through all that anguish, pain, and longing. Most of all, I wanted to be an active participant in my grief process. So I decided to turn my back on their advice and decided instead to conduct something of a self-experiment. I'd done the research, I had the tools. I wanted to know how useful they would be to me now in the face of such an enormous mountain to climb. Now, I have to confess at this point, I didn't really know that any of this was going to work. Parental bereavement is widely acknowledged as the hardest of losses to bear. But I can tell you now, 5 years on, what I already knew from the research, that you can rise up from adversity, that there are strategies that work, that it is utterly possible to make yourself think and act in certain ways that help you navigate tough times. There is a monumental body of research on how to do this stuff. Today, I'm just going to share with you 3 strategies. These are my go-to strategies that I relied upon and saved me in my darkest days. They're 3 strategies that underpin all of my work, and they're pretty readily available to us all. Anyone can learn them. You can learn them right here today. So number 1, resilient people get that shit happens. They know that suffering is part of life. This doesn't mean they actually welcome it in. They're not actually delusional. Just that when the tough times come, they seem to know that suffering is part of every human existence. And knowing this stops you from feeling discriminated against when the tough times come. Never once did I find myself thinking, why me? In fact, I remember thinking, why not me? Terrible things happen to you just like they do everybody else. That's your life now, time to sink or swim. The real tragedy is that not enough of us seem to know this any longer. We seem to live in an age where we're entitled to a perfect life, where shiny, happy photos on Instagram are the norm, when actually, as you all demonstrated at the start of my talk, the very opposite is true. Number 2, Resilient people are really good at choosing carefully where they select their attention. They have a habit of realistically appraising situations and typically managing to focus on the things that they can change and somehow accept the things that they can't. This is a vital, learnable skill for resilience. As humans, we are really good at noticing threats and weaknesses. We are hardwired for that negative. We're really, really good at noticing them. Negative emotions stick to us like Velcro, whereas positive emotions and experiences seem to bounce off like Teflon. Being wired in this way is actually really good for us and served us well from an evolutionary perspective. So imagine for a moment I'm a cave woman and I'm coming out of my cave in the morning and there's a saber-toothed tiger on one side and a beautiful rainbow on the other. It kind of pays for my survival for me to notice this tiger. The problem is we now live in an era where we are constantly bombarded by threats all day long. And our poor brains treat every single one of those threats as though they were a tiger. Our threat focus, our stress response is permanently dialed up. Resilient people don't diminish the negative, but they also have worked out a way of tuning into the good. One day, when doubts were threatening to overwhelm me, I distinctly remember thinking, no, you do not get to get swallowed up by this. You have to survive. You've got so much to live for. Choose life, not death. Don't lose what you have to what you have lost. In psychology, we call this benefit finding. In my brave new world, it involved trying to find things to be grateful for. At least our wee girl hadn't died of some terrible, long, drawn-out illness. She died suddenly, instantly, sparing us and her that pain. We had a huge amount of social support from family and friends to help us through. And most of all, we still had two beautiful boys to live for who needed us now and deserved to have as normal a life as we could possibly give them. Being able to switch the focus of your attention to also include the good has been shown by science to be a really powerful strategy. So in 2005, Marty Seligman and colleagues conducted an experiment, and all they asked people to do was think of 3 good things that had happened to them each day. What they found over the 6 months course of this study was that those people showed higher levels of gratitude, higher levels of happiness, and less depression over the course of the 6-month study. When you're going through grief, you might need a reminder, or you might need permission to feel grateful. In our kitchen, we've got a bright pink neon poster that reminds us to accept the good. In the American Army, they framed it a little bit differently. They talked to the army about hunting the good stuff. Find the language that...
Oh, sorry, 1 second. Let me get us back to where we were. I did not mean to cut her off.
First of all, we still had two beautiful... has been shown by science to be a really powerful strategy. So in 2005, Marty Seligman and colleagues conducted an experiment, and all they asked people to do was think of 3 good things that had happened to them each day. What they found over the 6 months course of this study was that those people showed higher levels of gratitude, higher levels of happiness, and less depression over the course of the 6-month study. When you're going through grief, you might need a reminder, or you might need permission to feel grateful. In our kitchen, we've got a bright pink neon poster that reminds us to accept the good. In the American Army, They framed it a little bit differently. They talked to the army about hunting the good stuff. Find the language that works for you, but whatever you do, make an intentional, deliberate, ongoing effort to tune into what's good in your world. Number 3, resilient people ask themselves, is what I'm doing helping or harming me? This is a question that's used a lot in good therapy. And boy, is it powerful. This was my go-to question in the days after the girls died. I would ask it again and again. Should I go to the trial and see the driver? Would that help me or would it harm me? Well, that was a no-brainer for me. I chose to stay away. But Trevor, my husband, decided to meet with the driver at a later time. Late at night, I'd find myself sometimes poring over old photos of Abby, getting more and more upset. I'd ask myself, really? Is this helping you or is it harming you? Put away the photos, go to bed for the night, be kind to yourself. This question can be applied to so many different contexts. Is the way I'm thinking and acting helping or harming you in your bid to get that promotion, to pass that exam, to recover from a heart attack? So many different ways. I write a lot about resilience, and over the years, this one strategy has prompted more positive feedback than any other. I get scores of letters and emails and things from all over the place of people saying what a huge impact it's had on their lives. Whether it is forgiving family, ancient transgressions, arguments from Christmases past, or whether it is just trawling through social media, whether it is asking yourself whether you really need that extra glass of wine, asking yourself whether what you're doing, the way you're thinking, the way you're acting is helping or harming you, puts you back in the driver's seat. It gives you some control over your decision making. 3 strategies, pretty simple. They're readily available to us all, anytime, anywhere. They don't require rocket science. Resilience isn't some fixed trait. It's not elusive that some people have and some people don't. It actually requires very ordinary processes, just the willingness to give them a go. I think we all have moments in life where our life path splits and the journey we thought we were going down takes some terrible, veers off to some terrible direction that we never anticipated and we certainly didn't want. It happened to me. It was awful beyond imagining. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you think, there's no way I'm coming back from this, I urge you to lean into these strategies and think again. I won't pretend that thinking this way is easy, and it doesn't remove all the pain. But if I've learned anything over the last 5 years, it is that thinking this way really does help. More than anything, it has shown me that it is possible to live and grieve at the same time. And for that, I will be always grateful. Thank you.
So that's Dr. Hohn's TED Talk, and I'm going to, that's embedded. I'm not sure if it'll go up for you in the, I'm not sure because it's so big whether or not it'll get posted, but I've got the link for it in my slides, whether it does or it doesn't. So just so you know, since we're talking about her book, I want to make sure that I tell you about this. Dr. Hohn teaches workshops, classes, and webinars. I have included a link for her website here, specifically for if you want one of those things. She describes herself as helping individuals, teams, and communities cope with the hard stuff. All right. So some of the helpful suggestions I think are particularly helpful from the book that some of you have finished reading and some of you have not yet finished reading, so I'll just list them here, is making a morning playlist, creating a memory box, So a morning playlist, songs make you think about the person or think about the situation, a memory box where you can store memorabilia, maybe it's stubs from a concert you went together to enjoy, maybe it's pictures, whatever it happens to be. Keeping a growth journal for ways in which you've grown and healed. Doing things to cultivate positive feelings, so engaging with life, engaging, further engaging with life by finding joyful and meaningful activities, building and maintaining your social connections, engaging in regular physical activity, which it turns out is important um, for many reasons, including, although she doesn't really talk about this in the book because the research wasn't out yet for all of this, but it turns out that regular, particularly aerobic exercise, improves the amount of neurotrophic factors in your brain, which improves your ability to switch your attention, which helps with reducing depression and helping you turn your attention away from ruminating and negative thoughts to more positive ones. So it helps in a variety of ways. As well as all the other health benefits you probably are already aware of with regular activity, including improving sleep. And it turns out that good sleep hygiene is essential to health and healing. And finally, mindfulness practices, while not helpful for everyone, are helpful for many, many people. So these are some of the suggestions from the book. And one of the things that Dr. Hone talks about in the book is, and she also mentioned this in her talk, is the notion of the 5 stages, the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did really groundbreaking work. She listened to terminally ill people and helped them to be heard. She increased public awareness of the lack of appropriate end-of-life care, particularly in the United States, but it's been a problem worldwide. And she testified to the US Senate about problems in the care of terminally ill people. She was a tremendous activist. However, her stages of grief, the denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, well, they're very much accepted in our culture, as these cartoons show you, right? Denial, exit now, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, next 4 exits, or you've got the Grim Reaper with denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance as boxes. But they're culturally accepted, but what's their scientific status? So what Dr. Hone says is absolutely right. Not everyone experiences those stages, and they don't necessarily go in any particular order, even if people do. It's more fluid than that. And the stages were developed really to describe people coping with terminal illness, not to describe grief broadly. And the stages are applicable to grief broadly for a small minority of grieving people. So maybe about 10% of people, when they grieve, progress through those 5 stages in the way in which we are sort of taught to think about it. And by the way, not everyone who's terminally ill experiences the 5 stages. When she herself was dying slowly from the consequences of multiple debilitating strokes, Kubler-Ross explained that she did not experience denial or bargaining, but she did find herself stuck for a very long time in anger. A common problem with clinicians misunderstanding Kubler-Ross's work, which is a common problem now for MDs and for therapists, unfortunately, is then people can be prescriptive with patients, expecting them to fit a model that really may not apply to them and probably doesn't apply to them, actually. So conceptualizing the model as having stages may result in patients feeling pressure to achieve certain stages in a linear progression, which isn't actually helpful. It's just not helpful. And it doesn't mean that what Dr. Kubler-Ross did wasn't wonderful. What she did was really important, wonderful work. She relied on qualitative interview data to develop her stages. And one of the critiques is, well, the model needs to be tested and we need other types of data. But she herself acknowledged limitations of her work. It was groundbreaking. No one study answers all questions. And she was very open in leaving space for researchers to investigate further. So I'm not criticizing her, but rather I'm saying that the way our culture has treated her stages of grief and and applied them broadly isn't the claim she made for them herself, and it isn't really useful in that way. So while her work is useful, that's not a useful way to use her work. Let me see. Right. So One thing I think we can all take away from the book, Resilient Grieving, is that self-care is important. In fact, it's essential. And I know you're always taking care of everyone else, but you need to take care of yourself too. Also, I need my stethoscope back, right? So, how often do we find ourselves doing these things? So, I'm going to urge you that if you're dealing with grief, and I will tell you, grief is cumulative. So, when you're dealing with new grief, you are revisiting old griefs as well, usually. And grief is, of course, not necessarily about death, it's about loss. So it could be about losing a feeling of safety, that your home is a safe place. It could be about a divorce, it could be about infertility, it can be about a lot of things. But no matter what are the things that you are contending with, and we all contend with things at some point and not fairly distributed, um, self care is important. So there are things you can take agency and control in. And in addition to the, is this helping me or harming me? Forgive me, I'm about to cough again. There we go. It's ragweed season here. Um, you can do things to say like, am I eating healthy meals? Am I hydrating? Am I getting exercise? Am I spending time with loved ones? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I getting regular medical care? Now, maybe with everything that's been going on, you haven't had time to make the appointment for the colonoscopy or the mammogram. Now's the time to do it. Um, Giving yourself some time to relax as well, accessing community support and giving yourself compassion. Nobody is perfect all the time, and it's stressful and hard dealing with grief, and it's not going to serve you well to expect yourself to be functioning perfectly and as if nothing happened. That's not going to help you. So, I want you to be thinking about right now what fills your cup. And we're going to come back to this question when we go to breakout rooms, but I want you to think about what fills your cup and what helps you when you're having hard times. What brings you joy? What brings you meaning? What is something you can do, even if it's a little tiny thing, even if a day is going to be horrible, can you make it just this little bit less bad or this little bit better for someone else, even if you yourself don't feel better? For some people, it's yoga or taking a shower or participating in your faith-based community or dance, calling a friend, um, baking, cooking, creating art, sports, whether it's watching it or participating in it. Maybe it's pickleball, I don't know. Listening to music, watching a favorite movie or show, swimming, whatever it is, think about what are things that fill your cup. Maybe it's time with your niece or nephew. Who knows what it is, but you do, right? So think about what could fill your cup. I'm going to recommend, and I promise you, they don't know I recommend them. I just happen to use their product and like it. I recommend the self-care app Finch. You can set it to remind you to do activities and goals that are personal to you. Maybe it's doing I don't know, doing a plank. Maybe it's walking around the neighborhood. Maybe it's going to a cultural event. Whatever it is, you can set it to remind you to do those things, and it gamifies it, and so you can earn little points and get little virtual goodies for the little zebra finch you're taking care of. It's there is a free version and a paid version. The paid version's a little nicer, but either one's lovely, and you might want to try it out. I use it every day. Um, all right, so people ask me for book recommendations. If you were here the last time I was here, you've already seen me recommend these books, but they're so good. Since some of you weren't here, I'm going to go ahead and recommend them again. Harold Kushner's When Bad Things Happen to Good People. How to Get Run Over by a Truck by Katie McKenna, who survived. She was not in a car when she was hit, who survived being run over by a truck. And Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is about his experiences enduring being in Nazi prison camp, being imprisoned in a concentration camp. So these are really great reads. I will tell you that Man's Search for Meaning, there's a lovely little video that I've got a link for that if you want to watch later, you can. A little bit about Viktor Frankl if you want to know more, where he can talk about why should we believe in others. And this is from someone who himself lived through having his wife and parents all perish in the concentration camps while he survived. So I will just share with you a couple of my favorite quotations from him. I know we're focusing on resilient grieving, but I think these are really march very nicely with what Lucy Hone is talking about. So bear in mind the book was published, gosh, I think probably before my mother was born, so it's been a minute. But so forgive that it's man, but I think he means humans. So ultimately, people should not ask what the meaning of our lives are, but rather must recognize that it's you who's being asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. Another one. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And then everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So again, these focus on accepting suffering and on taking agency when possible. So people often ask me about recommendations for books for children. So a book for children and people who love them. This is one that's really good at helping people look for what makes them happy on days when it's challenging. So taking a bath with the dog and other things that make me happy. And then, of course, so many of you are contending with loss due to the wildfires, and I'm so sorry about that. I'm sorry for all of the losses and pain that you're suffering. But there's this lovely, gentle book about post-traumatic stress disorder that's a lovely one for a child. It's not a bad one for adults, but it's aimed at children. But it's Big Bear Was Not the Same by Joanna Rowland. And it's about a bear who has survived a forest fire and is struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder. And then I've got a lovely set here of recommendations of books for children from St. Jude's Hospital. These are all grief books. And I've also got a link because it's a little tough to read all of these off the side here. I've got that linked for you as well. So I have been kindly reminded by Camilla that I should let you know that although usually at this time of year my course is already full, this is a low enrollment year for the Harvard Extension School so far. I'm hoping that will change. I challenge all of you to find a course, not necessarily mine, and take one. But the Harvard Extension School offers, among many other wonderful courses, my course on grief, which I'll be teaching this autumn. It's from 7:40 to 9:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it's about grief. So we'll read you my course description in case you're interested. So grief is ubiquitous. At some point in our lives, each of us will grieve, yet it can be a taboo topic. This course will provide you with an overview of the major theories, modern research, and current issues for understanding the phenomenon of grief. We examine psychological as well as anthropological and sociological research articles so we can better address questions such as, what is grief? Why do we grieve? Did Neanderthals grieve? Is grieving over the death of pets a new phenomenon? Is there more than one normal pattern of recovery? Are there effective treatments for people with complicated grief? What are some of the grieving practices of people in different cultures at different times in history? Is it possible to have a meaningful and worthwhile life despite grief? What does it mean to be resilient? We read and discuss a fascinating set of materials enriching our knowledge and understanding of this important universal topic. And I will tell you that although there's a lot of reading and writing, there's no exam. So if you are interested, the link for registering for courses is there. And even if it's not my course you're interested in, I will tell you there's some fabulous offerings this year. So in the wake of loss and pain, and Dr. Hone alludes to this, there's post-traumatic growth. is a possibility. And it's possible to suffer tremendously and yet still also find ways to find new possibilities, new ways of relating to others, personal strength, spiritual change, appreciation of life. This is the work of Tashi and Calhoun that this all builds on. They're the ones who identified what we now call post-traumatic growth, although this has a long history, although maybe not with this term. And then another question people ask me that I want to make sure that I address before we go to breakout rooms is when to seek help. So if you find that you are experiencing nightmares or other problems sleeping, avoiding reminders of what happened, having exaggerated startle response, unable to experience happiness, feeling on hyper alert, having panic symptoms or reliving the events, and especially if you're having any thoughts of harming yourself or someone else, it's time to reach out for help. And it's okay to reach out for help without those symptoms as well, if you're just suffering enough that you feel like you need a little extra support. So if that's the case, I've got a couple of resources here, and I think that Kimia and I think and Madeline, you're working on it as well. They're going to work on having some additional really useful resources for you. But this is what I've got for you. The Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Association, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy is an empirically supported way to address psychological problems such as complicated grief, etc. And the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies has a Find a Therapist page for people who are looking for someone who can do cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's a very good resource for finding therapists who are skilled in this particular methodology. Also, there's a Center for Prolonged Grief at Columbia University, and they can make recommendations and have information that's very useful. The work of George Bonanno has been central to what we now call prolonged grief. I think complicated grief would be a better term, but what we now call prolonged grief, there are treatments for it. There's no need to suffer more than you have to suffer. And finally, for those of you who are contending with post-traumatic stress disorder, one of the best supported treatments for it is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And if for some reason eye movements don't work for you, I know someone who does not have sight who instead did rhythmic tapping. That also works. There are ways to make it work with or without being able to do the eye movements. The eye movements aren't actually the magical ingredient here. But there's the EMDR Institute, so you can find people who are trained in conducting EMDR to help you. And that's not the only way to approach PTSD, but that is one of the better ways. So those are some resources I've got for you. And of course, I'm just going to reiterate that in the midst of and wake of major life disruption, trauma, and loss, it's normal to feel exhausted, fatigue, which Dr. Hone, of course, talks about in her book. It's normal to feel distress and sorrow. That's part of it. It's normal at times to feel discouraged, overwhelmed, or on edge. When you're in a dangerous situation, whether it's the danger of a wildfire or a dangerous partner or some other danger, what your job is to get to safety. And then once you're in a safe place, then you can tend with the load from what has happened. I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing I think I've got one more. And as I mentioned, grief is cumulative. So when a loss happens, you're going to be regrieving your previous losses. And when you're suffering, and we all suffer at times, don't worry in those moments that you have to find happiness per se. Instead, do something that's meaningful, something that lifts you up or contributes in some way. Do something that matters. Often you'll find happiness along the way. But even if you don't find happiness, you'll have made the world richer and better in some way. Okay. I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to say thank you. It's really lovely to have so many of you be here. Why don't we go ahead and stop the recording if that's okay?
Yes. So thank you so much, Cynthia. So what we're going to do now, folks, is we want to engage in some conversations with you. So we're going to go into breakout groups. So it will be Cynthia, myself, and Kimia. And we will engage in creating a list of all the different ways that we can fill our own cup. And this will be a checklist that you can use so you can engage in this practice of creating these happy moments and experiences that just help you cope and continue forward with how we're living and how we're doing. All right, so I'm going to stop the recording now.